A father and son left for the airport on Christmas Eve, 26 years later. A buried car told. On Christmas Eve of 1998, the small town of Maple Ridge was still half asleep when Mark Ellison stepped out of his front door. The winter air was cold but calm, the kind that made every sound feel softer. Snow covered the sidewalks in a thin layer, sparkling under the streetlights. Mark took a slow breath, watching the cloud of warm air drift in front of him before disappearing. It was still early, but he was used to mornings like this. He enjoyed the quiet, the stillness, and the promise of a new day. Inside, he could hear his 14-year-old son, Tyler, moving around the kitchen, eager to get going. Christmas Eve was special to them, not because of gifts or decorations, but because they were supposed to pick up someone they loved. For weeks, they had been talking about driving to the airport to bring home Mark's wife, Anna. She had been away for a work project and was returning just in time for the holidays. Tyler had been counting down the days on a small paper calendar hanging on the wall. He had drawn stars on every date leading up to her arrival, and on the 24th he had drawn a big circle and written, "Mom comes home," in his careful handwriting. It was all he talked about through December. Even when the winter weather made school buses late, or when his friends were busy with their own family plans, Tyler stayed cheerful because he knew his mother would walk through the front door soon. Mark checked the time on his wristwatch and called out, "You ready, buddy?" His voice was warm, patient, and full of the kind of quiet excitement only a parent feels when sharing something meaningful with their child. Tyler hurried out of the kitchen, still zipping up his jacket, his cheeks already pink from moving around. His hair was slightly messy, as usual, but his smile was neat and bright. He grabbed his backpack, though he wasn't going anywhere far. It was a habit. He liked to carry things that reminded him of his family, like the little camera he used to take pictures of small moments. "Got everything?" Mark asked, though he already knew the answer. Tyler always double-checked. "Yeah." "And I brought the camera," Tyler said proudly. "I'll take a picture when we see Mom." Mark smiled. "Good idea, she'll like that." They walked toward the dark blue sedan parked in the driveway. Snowflakes had gathered on its roof, forming a soft white blanket. Mark brushed some of it away before opening the door. The car was old but reliable, with a heater that took a minute to warm up and a radio that only played certain stations clearly. Still, it held many memories: road trips, school drop-offs, and late-night drives when someone forgot milk, or when Tyler couldn't sleep and Mark took him out to see the stars. Today, the car felt like part of the plan, like it belonged in this Christmas Eve story. Inside, the heater hummed quietly as warm air slowly filled the space. Tyler rubbed his hands together, waiting for the warmth to reach his fingers. He glanced at the wrapped box sitting on the back seat, a welcome gift for Anna. It wasn't big, but it meant something. Inside was a keychain shaped like a small globe. Tyler picked it out from a local shop because it reminded him of all the places his mom traveled for work. "So she doesn't forget where home is," he had told the shop owner. Now the gift waited, just like they had waited. Mark backed out of the driveway carefully. The streets were empty except for a few early risers clearing snow off their porches. Holiday lights blinked softly along fences and rooftops. Some houses had inflatable decorations, gently swaying in the cold breeze, while others kept things simple with candles glowing in their windows. Everything looked calm and peaceful. Even the sky, still a deep shade of blue, seemed quiet. As they drove along the road, Tyler leaned forward, his eyes on the world outside. "Do you think Mom will be surprised we're early?" he asked. "Maybe," Mark said with a chuckle. "She knows us, we're always early." "But that's good, right?" "It's very good," Mark reassured him. "It means we're excited." Tyler sat back, satisfied. He pressed his hands against the window, leaving small handprints that fogged up quickly. He traced tiny shapes in the fog, stars, snowmen, and eventually the letters MOM. He grinned at his own artwork, his imagination restless with joy. The car moved smoothly through town, past the bakery that always smelled like warm bread, even on cold mornings, past the small post office with its tall flagpole, and past the school where Tyler spent most of his days. Everything was familiar, comforting. Neither of them knew this would be the last time they would see these quiet places together, but nothing in their day felt unusual or worrisome. It was just a simple holiday morning with simple hopes. About 10 minutes into the drive, they passed their neighbor, Mr. Peters, who was scraping ice off his windshield. He raised his hand in greeting, and Mark waved back. Later, Mr. Peters would remember that moment clearly and mention how cheerful they looked, how normal the morning felt. At the time, though, it was just another small exchange in a small town. "Do you think the plane will be on time?" Tyler asked as they continued to drive. "I hope so," Mark replied. "Airport gets busy on holidays, but your mom usually messages if there's a delay." "She didn't message," Tyler said. "That means everything is on schedule." Tyler nodded confidently. He trusted both his parents completely. In his mind, anything they said was true, simple, and stable. He had never experienced anything that challenged that trust. To him, life felt like a straight road with clear signs. They drove onto the highway, where the snow was light and the lanes looked smooth. The world around them seemed to stretch out in long white fields. The sun had not fully risen yet, but a faint glow appeared behind the clouds, promising a bright day. The car's headlights cut through the gentle mist, and holiday songs played softly on the radio. "Dad," Tyler said after a moment, "what do you think Mom will want to do first when she gets home?" Mark thought about it. "Probably hug us." Tyler grinned. "Yeah, but after that?" "Well," Mark said, "maybe she'll want hot chocolate. She loves the way you make it." Tyler brightened even more. "I'll make it right when we get home then?" "That sounds perfect." Silence settled in the car, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that felt warm, full of thoughts and plans. Tyler imagined his mother walking through the front door wearing her long gray coat, carrying her suitcase with stickers from different countries. He imagined helping her carry her bags, hearing her laugh, listening to her stories. He imagined the three of them sitting by the living room tree with the lights turned on, sharing stories and drinking hot chocolate. Mark had his own thoughts. He wondered if Anna would be tired after her long flight. He thought about how happy she would be to see Tyler's big smile, and how relieved he would feel once they were all home together. He also thought about the unfinished Christmas decorations still in the box on their living room floor. Maybe they would finish them that night, all three of them together. As the miles passed, the father and son enjoyed the peaceful ride. Nothing rushed them, nothing interrupted their conversation. The world around them felt gentle and forgiving, as if it knew they were heading somewhere important. The highway signs eventually indicated they were getting closer to the airport. Tyler sat up straighter, his excitement growing by the minute. "We're almost there," he whispered, mostly to himself. "We sure are," Mark said. "She'll be so happy to see you." "And you," Tyler added quickly. Mark smiled. "I hope so." By the time they reached the outskirts of the city near the airport, the early morning traffic had begun to build. Cars moved slowly but steadily, their headlights glowing like small stars in a line. Tyler watched everything: the airport buses, the families in cars packed with luggage, the workers setting out cones to direct traffic. He liked airports because they reminded him of stories waiting to happen. People arriving, people leaving, people meeting again. But before they could reach the parking area, something unexpected happened, a small, quiet detail easily overlooked. Mark checked his phone and saw no message from Anna. He frowned slightly, thinking it was odd but not worrying. Phones sometimes lost signal. Flights sometimes landed early without passengers having time to send updates. Still, he adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, curious. "We'll know soon," he told himself more than he told Tyler. Meanwhile, back in Maple Ridge, their home sat quiet and still. The wrapped gifts under the tree waited. The clock on the wall ticked in calm, steady beats. Everything in the house expected their return later that morning, but the morning stretched on and they didn't return. What began as a simple drive on Christmas Eve soon turned into a mystery no one expected. As hours passed, neighbors wondered. As evening came, concern grew. And by nightfall, the small town realized the father and son who left with smiles and simple plans had not arrived where they were supposed to be. No one knew yet where they had gone, or why the day had taken such a different turn. No one understood how a morning so peaceful could lead to so many years of questions. But for now, all anyone remembered was how the day started, with hope, excitement, and a family ready to be whole again. When the sun rose fully over Maple Ridge on that Christmas Eve in 1998, the town carried on as usual. People prepared breakfast, children played with early gifts, and stores opened for last-minute shoppers. No one yet knew that something was wrong. The world still believed that Mark and Tyler Ellison were simply on their way to the airport, expecting to return home soon with Anna. In those early hours, Everything looked normal on the outside. But as the day moved forward, small moments began to reveal that something was not as expected. Around the time Mark and Tyler should have reached the airport, Anna stepped outside of the busy terminal, pulling her suitcase behind her. She looked around, expecting to see their car at any moment. She checked her watch, then her phone. There were no messages. She waited patiently at first, imagining they were stuck in holiday traffic. She watched other families greet one another with smiles and hugs. Every time she saw a blue car approach, her heart lifted slightly, thinking it might be them. But it never was. She tried calling Mark, but the call didn't go through. She tried again, thinking maybe he was driving through a spot where the signal was weak. After 5 attempts, she grew uneasy. She wasn't someone who panicked easily, but she could feel a small worry growing. She sent him a message. "I'm outside the arrivals area. Tell me when you're close." Minutes passed with no reply. She sent another, "Everything okay?" Again, nothing. She waited in the cool December air until her hands grew cold. People around her were leaving, the crowd thinning as the morning moved on. Eventually, she decided to take a taxi home, thinking they might have misunderstood the time of her arrival. Maybe they thought her flight landed later. Maybe they were already at home waiting, expecting her to walk inside with a cheerful laugh. That thought comforted her in the moment. But when the taxi pulled into their driveway, the house was still and quiet. There were no footprints in the snow near the front door except her own from the day she left. Inside, everything was as she had left it. The holiday decorations half finished, the kitchen lights off, the box of wrapping paper still open. She called out their names, expecting perhaps they had just stepped out or were playing some kind of joke. No one answered. She checked the bedrooms, the bathroom, the backyard, nothing. She felt a strange, empty silence settle over her. She sat on the couch, feeling unsure what to think. Her mind tried to offer reasonable explanations. They stopped somewhere, the car broke down, they had trouble on the road. But if that were the case, why had neither of them called? She dialed Mark's phone again, straight to voicemail. As afternoon turned to evening, concern began turning into genuine worry. When night fell and they still had not returned, Anna contacted the police. At first, the officers reassured her gently, telling her that sometimes people experience delays or misunderstandings. But when they learned that neither Mark nor Tyler had sent any messages, and that their car had not been spotted anywhere on the way to or from the airport, the officers agreed it needed attention. Meanwhile, neighbors were starting to notice that the Ellison home, usually glowing with warm lights on Christmas Eve, remained dark. When word spread that Anna had returned alone, people began asking questions. The kind of questions that carried a small shiver of fear, even though no one wanted to admit it. The next morning, the police officially began a search. They checked the route between Maple Ridge and the airport, asking gas stations, stores, and toll workers if anyone had seen the blue sedan. No one had. They searched the airport parking lots, rows and rows of cars, but theirs wasn't there. Volunteers from the town offered to help, walking along roads and wooded areas. Helicopters scanned the region from above. Every hour the search grew larger, but no trail appeared. People in town talked quietly among themselves. Some whispered their worries, while others tried to reassure one another. They all remembered seeing Mark and Tyler leave the house that morning. They remembered the smiles, the excitement. Now, they wondered what had happened between their street and the airport. Days passed, each one colder than the last. Christmas came and went without joy in the Ellison home. The tree remained half-decorated. The wrapped gifts stayed untouched. Tyler's school friends sent cards to Anna, wishing for a miracle. She read every note with shaking hands, grateful for kindness but aching from the emptiness. In the weeks that followed, theories began to form. Some believed there had been an accident, a wrong turn, bad weather, maybe a quiet road where something unexpected happened. Others believed someone might have offered them help and taken advantage of their trust. A few people whispered ideas they couldn't prove, things they didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. And then there were those who thought, gently but honestly, that perhaps Mark had planned something. But that idea made little sense. He had no reason to leave behind the life he cared about so deeply. The police considered every possibility. They searched other regions. They reviewed phone records. They spoke to everyone who knew the Ellisons. But the investigation always returned to the same truth. No evidence, no sightings, no messages, no clues. The world felt as if it had simply swallowed the father and son without leaving behind even a footprint. Months passed, and hope slowly began to shift into quiet acceptance. Not acceptance of an ending, because no one knew how things had ended, but acceptance that answers might take time, maybe a long time. The case became one that people remembered often but rarely spoke about unless asked. It was too tender, too strange, too full of unanswered questions. As the years went by, life moved forward around the mystery. Anna eventually moved to another town, not because she wanted to leave her memories behind, but because she needed a quieter place to live with her thoughts. Friends checked on her often, but she carried a kind of sadness that no one could smooth away. She tried to rebuild her life, but some days were heavy and others were lighter. She learned to navigate the space between hope and grief, a place many people never experience. Tyler's friends grew older, but they never forgot him. They remembered the way he laughed, the way he always carried his small camera, the way he was kind without trying to be. Sometimes, when they walked past the schoolyard, they imagined him still there, running across the snow with his jacket unzipped even though it was cold. They shared memories at sleepovers, promising not to forget him as the years passed. Mark's coworkers also carried questions. They remembered how reliable he was, how he never failed to keep his word. They remembered how he talked about his family with pride, how he liked to leave the office early on Fridays to spend time with Tyler. The idea that he might have chosen to disappear didn't match anything they knew about him. The story became part of Maple Ridge's history. New families moving to the area heard it eventually, usually during winter when memories felt more vivid. People retold it carefully, always with respect. It became a reminder of how quickly a moment can change a life, how a simple morning drive can become something no one expects. 26 years is a long time to carry questions. Some people who had known the Ellisons moved away. Others grew older. Children who heard the story from their parents grew up thinking of it as something distant, a mystery that belonged to another time. Yet those who had known Mark and Tyler personally felt the ache even decades later. They wished for answers, not for themselves, but for peace, for the mother who had waited, for the child who never finished growing up, for the gentle man who loved his family more than anything. Even so, the world had a way of surprising people. Nature had a way of keeping secrets for years, even decades. And time, though slow and quiet, eventually brought everything to light in one way or another. Those who wondered about the Ellisons had no idea that the answer was not far away, not in another city or another state, but sitting quietly beneath a place people had walked past many times. But in part two, the world did not yet know this. People only knew the questions, the silence, the missing pieces. The story of the lost father and son lived on, year after year, like a whisper carried through winter air. No one could guess that, after 26 years, a discovery would finally reveal what had happened on that quiet Christmas Eve morning. In the summer of 2024, Maple Ridge experienced something unusual. The weather had been warmer than normal, and the rainfall that usually arrived in early summer simply did not come. Lakes and streams shrank slowly, exposing areas that had not been seen in years. People talked about the drought in grocery stores, at gas stations, and in front yards. Though the situation was concerning, most people adjusted to it with patience. They watered their gardens less and took shorter showers. Still, no one imagined that the dry weather would uncover something important, something connected to a mystery that had rested silently for more than 2 decades. Lake Darrington, a large reservoir about 30 miles from Maple Ridge, became one of the places most affected by the drought. Usually, the lake stretched wide and deep, with calm blue water and boats gliding across its surface. Families often visited on weekends for picnics, fishing, and gentle hikes. But by July, long patches of mud began to appear around the edges. What had once been hidden underwater for years now lay bare under the sun. People who visited the lake pointed at strange shapes rising from the muddy ground. Old tree stumps, forgotten fishing nets, even pieces of wood from docks left behind decades earlier. On a warm afternoon in late July, 2 hikers named Laura and Ben walked along one of the trails that circled the lake. They often explored the area during summer, enjoying the quiet hills and the smell of pine trees. This time, however, the scenery looked different. The water line was much lower, and the deeper sections of the lake were now shallow, with cracked mud stretching out toward the center. "It looks different every time we come," Ben said as he wiped sweat from his forehead. Laura nodded. The water used to reach all the way up here. Remember? I do. Hard to believe it's the same lake. They continued walking until something caught Laura's attention. A small metallic corner stuck out from the mud several yards away. It didn't look like a rock. It didn't look like wood. It had a shape that felt too clean, too smooth, too man-made. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing. Ben squinted. "Yeah, strange. Want to check it out." They carefully stepped off the trail, making sure not to slip on the soft mud. As they walked closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't just a random object. It looked like the corner of a car roof. Only a small part was visible, but it was enough to make them stop. "This shouldn't be here," Laura whispered. "Could be an old dumped car," Ben said, though his voice carried uncertainty. "But how would it get this far into the lake?" They walked around the object, trying to see more. The mud was thick and soft, making each step slow. More of the structure appeared as they approached: a window frame, a broken mirror, a faded strip of blue paint. The car had clearly been underwater for a very long time. "I think we need to call someone," Laura said. Ben agreed. Within the hour, authorities arrived. Rangers, police officers, and specialists gathered quickly. The area was taped off, and teams began planning how to safely remove the vehicle from the muddy ground. Curious onlookers stood at a distance, whispering to one another. Some took photos, though no one could identify the car from the small pieces visible above the mud. The next morning, a careful operation began. It took hours to free the car without damaging it further. Workers used ropes, boards, and gentle equipment to pull the vehicle up as the mud resisted. Slowly, inch by inch, the old sedan rose from the earth. Onlookers gasped as its shape became fully visible, a dark blue four-door car covered in rust and silt. The moment investigators cleaned enough mud to see the side of the car clearly, everything changed. A small metal plate near the front door still showed a few readable numbers, part of the vehicle identification number. The lead investigator stared at the numbers, then stepped aside to confirm the details. His expression shifted from curiosity to shock. "We need to secure the area immediately," he said. "This car matches the description of the Ellisons' vehicle from 1998. That single statement spread through the group quickly. People who had heard the story felt their hearts tighten. Some stepped back instinctively. Others whispered in disbelief. After 26 years of searching, hoping, and wondering, the car had surfaced on its own, all because the lake water had dropped just low enough to reveal it. News of the discovery reached Maple Ridge within hours. Phones buzzed, social media posts spread, and soon nearly everyone in town knew what had been found. Older residents who remembered the disappearance well felt a mix of sadness and quiet relief. Younger residents, who had only heard the story from their parents, felt amazed that something hidden for so long had finally appeared. Meanwhile, investigators continued working at Lake Darrington. As they opened the car doors, they discovered objects that had remained untouched since 1998. A small, faded jacket, a broken pair of glasses, a rusted wallet containing an old driver's license with Mark Ellison's name. And on the floor of the back seat, they found a round wristwatch, small, scratched, but still recognizable because of the tiny initials engraved on the back. The items were handled with great care. Nothing was touched without protective gloves. Everything was documented carefully, photographed from different angles, labeled, and stored gently. The investigators treated the discovery with a deep sense of respect, knowing it belonged to a family whose story had been frozen in time. Word of the recovered car reached Anna as well. When she received the call, she sat down in silence. She had lived with questions for so many years that finally hearing about a discovery felt both comforting and overwhelming. She didn't cry at first. She simply closed her eyes and let herself breathe slowly. She had imagined answers for so long, but now real answers were close, perhaps only days away. She whispered softly, "Thank you," though she didn't know who she was thanking. Maybe the hikers. Maybe the investigators. Or maybe the world itself for finally giving her something after so many years of silence. Back at Lake Darrington, investigators studied the area surrounding the discovery site. They noticed a narrow dirt path leading toward a steep slope that descended into the lake. Before the drought, that entire slope had been underwater, invisible to anyone passing by. But now it was exposed, revealing faint tire marks frozen in hardened mud. They followed the marks with careful steps, taking notes, measuring angles, and documenting everything. One of the investigators shook his head gently. It looks like the car may have gone down this path. If the lake level was higher back then, it would have been almost impossible to see. Another investigator added, if this happened during early morning hours, and if there was fog, they might not have known this path wasn't a road. Their words were quiet, spoken with a tone of understanding rather than judgment. They weren't trying to place blame. They were simply trying to piece together a moment lost in time. Experts soon arrived to study the car itself. They inspected the metal, the engine, the doors, the wheels, and the frame. They tried to understand how the car had entered the water. Days of analysis led them to a growing belief. The Ellisons' car had not been driven into the lake intentionally. It appeared to be the result of poor visibility, icy winter ground, and unfamiliar terrain. Nothing suggested wrongdoing. Nothing suggested an escape. Instead, everything pointed to a heartbreaking accident that had remained hidden for decades. The more investigators learned, the more the town began to understand the truth. The community gathered in quiet conversations, sharing memories of Mark and Tyler. People expressed how good-hearted they had been, how gentle, how loved. The discovery of the car made the old stories feel alive again. It reminded the town of a father who loved spending time with his son and a boy who carried a small camera everywhere he went. As investigators continued their work, reporters visited the lake as well. They interviewed the hikers who found the car, though both Laura and Ben spoke modestly. They didn't want attention. They only hoped the discovery would finally bring answers to the family. Maps of the area were shown on the news, highlighting the spot where the car was found. But reporters were careful not to create sensational stories. They respected the family's pain and the community's history. Through all of this, something gentle began to settle over Maple Ridge, something quiet, something that felt a little like healing. For 26 years, the disappearance of Mark and Tyler had been a shadow, something that hovered in the background of holidays, of winter mornings, of conversations between old friends. Now, the shadow was lifting. Even though more details needed to be confirmed, people felt closer to understanding what had happened. The drought had taken away the lake's water, but in doing so, it gave back a truth that had been resting at the bottom for far too long. A truth that had been waiting patiently for the world to lower itself enough to reveal it. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting warm light across the exposed lakebed, everyone who heard the news felt the same quiet thought rising within them. After all these years, the story was finally moving forward again. After the discovery of the car at Lake Darrington, the investigation entered a new and delicate stage. For years, people had lived with guesses and theories, but now experts finally had something real to study. The car, once gently lifted from the mud, was transported to a secure facility where specialists could examine it with care. The vehicle was old, rusted, and worn from many seasons underwater, but it still carried clues, tiny details that had survived time, waiting for the right moment to be seen again. Inside the facility, bright lights shone down on the car as technicians worked slowly and respectfully. The doors were cleaned, the windows brushed free of mud, and every inch of the vehicle was checked. The smell of old earth still clung to it, mixing with the faint scent of rust. But the experts didn't rush. They understood the weight of what they were handling. They knew the story behind the car was not just about evidence. It was about a family that had searched for answers for 26 long years. One of the investigators, a gentle man named David, had been a young officer back in 1998 when the Ellisons disappeared. Now older and with many years of experience behind him, he felt a personal responsibility to help complete the story. He stood beside the car, studying the dents, scratches, and marks that time had left. "It's strange," he said softly to one of the younger technicians. "I remember the day this case was opened. I never thought I'd still be working on it so many years later." The technician nodded. "It must feel very meaningful to be part of the answer." David smiled sadly. "It does, but I also wish we could have found this sooner." Over the next several days, specialists studied the car carefully. They found no signs of anything harmful. There was nothing that suggested the car had been damaged on purpose or handled by anyone with bad intentions. Instead, the majority of the marks on the vehicle appeared natural. Scratches from rocks under the water, dents from years of shifting mud, and rust from long exposure. What the experts focused on were the small details that could explain how the car had entered the lake in the first place. Outside the facility, a team of field investigators continued examining the area around Lake Darrington. The water had dropped so low that wide sections of the lakebed were exposed. The ground was firm in some areas and soft in others, creating a landscape of surprising patterns and shapes. The investigators walked slowly, taking photos and marking every point that seemed important. They noticed the narrow dirt path that led down the slope had a slight curve. In the present day, it looked too uneven to be mistaken for a real road. But back in 1998, with winter frost covering everything and heavy fog in the early morning, it might have appeared like part of an official route, especially to someone unfamiliar with the lake area. One of the field investigators, a woman named Claire, bent down to examine the faint tire marks in the hardened mud. Though old, the marks suggested a vehicle had moved down the slope at a steady angle. She took notes carefully. "It doesn't look like the car swerved suddenly," she said. "It seems more like it followed the slope naturally." Another investigator added, "That lines up with what we're thinking. If the ground was icy, the car could have slid even if the driver didn't mean to go this way." The more they studied the path, the clearer it became. The slope, now exposed, was hidden under water at the time of the disappearance. In winter, the edges were even less visible, and with fog rolling in from the water, visibility would have been very low. The investigators knew that early morning fog in December could be thick enough to blur distance and shape. That meant Mark and Tyler might not have realized where they were heading. Experts returned to the facility with the information gathered at the lake. They compared it with the condition of the car. Gradually, a picture began to form, a gentle, heartbreaking moment frozen in time. It seemed likely that the Ellisons had accidentally driven down the slope toward the lake without noticing the danger. The car could have slid quietly, without any dramatic movement, especially if the ground was slippery. And once the car entered the water, it would have sunk deeper over time, resting in the mud where no one could see it for years. The investigators discussed their findings carefully. They wanted to be certain before sharing any conclusions. They studied every detail again and again, making sure nothing was overlooked. Even though the story pointed toward a tragic accident, they wanted absolute clarity before presenting the results to the Ellison family. Meanwhile, the news of the investigation continued to spread gently throughout Maple Ridge and nearby towns. People followed updates closely, not out of curiosity alone, but out of respect and hope. Many of them had lived through the original search. They remembered the posters, the long nights, the unanswered questions. Now, the idea that answers were finally appearing brought a quiet sense of relief to the community. The local library even set up a small display on community history, including old newspaper articles about the Ellison case. People stopped to look at the headlines, remembering where they were the day the father and son disappeared. Some brought their children to show them, wanting the younger generation to understand why the discovery at Lake Darrington mattered so much. Back in the investigation room, work continued. Specialists studied the engine and found that it had not been damaged by anything external before entering the lake. They checked the brakes. They studied the seatbelts. Everything pointed to the car being in normal working condition before the accident. Nothing hinted at wrongdoing. Nothing suggested a planned disappearance. Once all the data was gathered, the investigators sat down to reconstruct the likely sequence of events. The timeline they created was gentle and respectful, focusing only on what the evidence supported. Mark and Tyler likely drove near the lake area in the early morning, perhaps taking a shortcut or following a road they believed led toward the airport. Winter fog made it difficult to see clearly. The ground was icy in places. At some point, they must have turned onto the dirt path without realizing it wasn't part of the main road. The slope, covered with frost, made it difficult to stop or reverse. The car slid down quietly and entered a section of the lake that had deeper water at the time. The moment was quick, unexpected, and silent. Once the investigation team had confidence in this explanation, they prepared to share it with the Ellison family. It was not an easy task. Even though the information offered clarity, it also carried the finality that the family had feared for decades. But the investigators hoped that knowing the truth, even after such a long time, would bring peace rather than new pain. Honor agreed to meet with the investigators in a private office. When she arrived, she carried a small notebook in her hand. For years, she had written memories, questions, and hopes inside it. She sat quietly, listening as the investigators explained the findings. They spoke gently, slowly, making sure she understood every part. As she listened, she felt a mixture of emotions. Sorrow filled her eyes, remembering all the years she had wondered, yet relief also settled in her heart. She finally knew the truth. She finally understood what happened that Christmas Eve morning. There was no confusion, no unanswered question hanging in the air. The story she had lived with for 26 years was now complete. "Thank you," she said softly when the investigators finished. "Thank you for not forgetting them." David, the older investigator, replied with equal softness. "We never stopped hoping we'd find the answer. We're truly sorry it took this long." Anna nodded, wiping a gentle tear. "I'm grateful, truly grateful." When she left the office, the world outside felt different. The sky seemed clearer. The breeze felt lighter. She knew her healing would continue, but now she could move forward with a peaceful heart. She no longer had to imagine hundreds of possibilities. She no longer had to live in the space between hope and uncertainty. The truth, though bittersweet, had finally found her. As for the community, the results of the investigation were shared respectfully. People reacted with quiet sadness and relief. No one judged. No one speculated anymore. They all understood it had been an accident, an unexpected, unavoidable moment created by nature, timing, and winter conditions. The discovery brought closure not only to the Ellison family, but also to Maple Ridge itself. The story that had once been a question was now an answer. The father and son who disappeared on Christmas Eve had not chosen to leave. They had not met any harm from another person. They had simply faced an unfortunate accident hidden by time and water. The lake, once mysterious, now held a sense of peace, and the town, once puzzled, now carried a gentle understanding. The truth had been found, and it had arrived not through force, but through nature's quiet shifting, revealing what had been waiting beneath the surface for 26 long years. When the truth of what happened to Mark and Tyler finally reached the people of Maple Ridge, the town felt something it hadn't felt in years: quiet closure. It wasn't happiness, and it wasn't celebration. It was something softer, something made of understanding and peace. After 26 years of wondering, the mystery had finally settled into a clear story. People carried the news gently, like holding a fragile memory in both hands. Anna took several days to herself after hearing the full explanation from the investigators. She stayed indoors, sitting by her living room window, the same window she had looked out of so many times before while waiting for answers that never came. Now, when she looked outside, the world felt steady. The truth had arrived, and even though it brought sadness, it also brought a kind of calm. She allowed herself to breathe in this new feeling, to let the truth sink into her heart in slow, quiet waves. She opened the small notebook she had kept since 1998, the one filled with questions, hopes, and memories, and read through the pages. For the first time, she didn't feel the emptiness that always came when she reached the end. She no longer had to write new questions. She no longer had to imagine different possibilities. She knew the reality now. She touched the page gently and whispered, "Thank you for coming back to me." She wasn't talking to anyone specific, but somehow the words felt right. A few days later, she returned to Maple Ridge to visit the place where she and her family had lived all those years ago. Even though she had moved away many years earlier, the town still felt familiar when she entered it. The streets were lined with older trees now, their branches thicker, their leaves heavier with years. New houses had been built, and some of the old shops had changed owners, but the heart of the town remained the same. People still greeted each other warmly. Neighbors still waved from their porches, and memories still lived quietly in the spaces between houses and sidewalks. Anna parked near her old home and stepped outside. The house had been painted a new color by its current owners, but the foundation, the shape, the porch, they all felt the same. She stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of the place where she had once waited for her husband and son to come home. She didn't feel anger or pain anymore. She felt gratitude that the truth had finally reached her. A neighbor from long ago, now much older, came outside and recognized her immediately. "Anna," he said softly, almost afraid he was mistaken. She smiled gently. "Hi, Mr. Peters." "It's been a long time." He walked over slowly, his steps careful. "I heard the news," he said with compassion. "I'm so sorry for everything you went through, but I'm glad you finally know." "Thank you," she replied. "That means a lot." They stood in silence for a moment. The summer breeze moved through the trees, rustling the leaves like distant whispers. Mr. Peters told her how the community had never forgotten Mark and Tyler, how people spoke of them with kindness, how the town carried their memory through the years. Anna listened with warmth in her eyes. It comforted her deeply to know that her family had remained part of the town's heart. While Anna revisited old places, the investigators finished writing their final report. It was prepared with great care, using gentle language that respected the years of waiting and the emotions connected to the case. Even though the story had a sad ending, the investigators believed it was important to explain everything clearly so the community could understand it fully and respectfully. In the quiet room of the investigation center, David, the older investigator, read through the final report one last time. When he finished, he closed the file with a thoughtful expression. "It's time to let this story rest," he said. He meant that in the kindest way possible. The truth had been found, and now it could be honored rather than searched for. Once the official findings were shared, people in Maple Ridge began planning a gentle remembrance event. They didn't want anything loud or grand. They wanted something peaceful that reflected the personalities of Mark and Tyler. A simple gathering near Lake Darrington felt meaningful, close to the place where the truth had finally surfaced. On a warm afternoon in late summer, members of the community gathered by the lake. The drought had begun to ease a little, and parts of the water had risen again, slowly covering the mud where the car had been discovered. It felt symbolic, as if the lake was returning to its natural state now that it had finished revealing the story it held for so long. People stood quietly in small groups. Some carried flowers, others held hands with family members. Children who had grown into adults came too, remembering the boy they once knew. They shared soft memories, how Tyler loved taking pictures, how he always asked questions, how he liked to help teachers carry books. They remembered Mark's warm smile, his gentle nature, his love for his son. A small wooden bench had been placed near the water with a simple plaque. It did not tell the whole story. It simply read, "In memory of Mark and Tyler Ellison, forever part of Maple Ridge." Anna sat on the bench, touching the plaque with her fingertips. She felt grateful not for the loss, but for the love the town had shown. For the years they remembered her family, for the kindness they offered without being asked. People approached her one by one, offering gentle words. A woman who had been one of Tyler's teachers shared a story about how he once helped another student who felt shy. A man who had worked with Mark remembered how he always stayed late to help finish projects. Anna listened to every memory with a tender smile. These stories felt like small lights, warming the place in her heart where sadness had lived for so long. After the gathering, many people stayed by the lake to enjoy the peaceful atmosphere. The sun reflected off the water, creating a soft, golden glow. Children tossed pebbles into the shallow water, and the ripples spread gently across the surface. Laughter mixed with the soft sound of the breeze, and the scene felt almost like a moment frozen in time, quiet, respectful, and full of calm. As the crowd slowly thinned, Anna walked along the lakeside trail. She paused at the spot where the hikers had first noticed the car sticking out of the mud. She imagined the moment, the surprise, the confusion, and then the realization of what had been uncovered. She whispered a quiet thank you to the couple who found it. Without them, the truth might have remained hidden forever. She continued walking and soon reached a shady area beneath a tall pine tree. She sat down on a flat rock and closed her eyes. The sound of the water, the distant voices, and the soft rustling of leaves made her feel peaceful. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. For the first time in many years, her heart felt steady. The uncertainty that once weighed on her had lifted. In the following weeks, Maple Ridge slowly returned to normal life, but something had changed inside the town. The discovery at the lake had reminded people to slow down, appreciate loved ones, and understand how precious moments could be. Many families spent more time together, went on long walks, shared meals, and created new memories. They realized how quickly life could shift and how important it was to hold on to the people they cared about. Schools in the area included lessons about community support and understanding. Teachers used the Ellison story, not the sadness, but the kindness that followed, to show students how strong a town could be when people cared for one another. Students wrote letters expressing hope, gratitude, and appreciation for their families. Some even wrote messages for Tyler, promising to remember him. News outlets that covered the story did so gently, highlighting the peaceful closure rather than the mystery. They focused on the hikers who showed responsibility, the investigators who worked tirelessly, and the town that stood together for decades. It became a story not of loss, but of community, patience, and the quiet strength of truth. Even Lake Darrington seemed to carry a new sense of calm. As water levels slowly rose, nature began covering the place where the car had rested. Grass started to grow again near the edges, and small patches of flowers appeared. Visitors came to walk the trails, often pausing by the memorial bench. Some sat in silence, others whispered messages of hope. The lake, once holding a secret, now held a story of remembrance and gentle healing. Anna visited the lake often. Each time she came, she felt a little lighter. She brought a notebook, though now she filled it with peaceful thoughts instead of unanswered questions. She wrote about gratitude. She wrote about memories she wanted to keep alive. She wrote about the kindness people had shown her. Sometimes she imagined Mark and Tyler walking beside her during her visits. Not in a sad way, but in a comforting way, as if they were cheering her on to keep moving forward. She felt their presence in the breeze, in the quiet water, in the laughter of families who visited the lake. They were not gone completely. They had become part of the world in a new way, part of the town, part of the lake, part of the memories of everyone who knew them. In time, the story of the father and son who disappeared on Christmas Eve became more than a mystery. It became a lesson in patience, resilience, and love. It showed that even when answers take years to surface, they often arrive in ways no one expects. And it reminded everyone that closure does not erase love. It simply gives it a place to rest. Mark and Tyler's story lived on, not as a tale of loss, but as a gentle reminder of the bond between a parent and a child, the strength of a community, and the quiet way nature can return long-lost truths. Their memory, warm and bright, continued shaping Maple Ridge for years to come, touching hearts and guiding people toward kindness. Even decades later, visitors to Lake Darrington sat on the memorial bench, reading the plaque and asking about the Ellisons. And each time, someone from Maple Ridge would share the story softly, with care, ensuring that the father and son were never forgotten. And so, the truth that had once been hidden beneath the water became a lasting reminder above it, bringing peace to the family, the community, and the quiet town that never stopped remembering.